They say that 99% of the time, that feeling of being watched is just your imagination. But it's that 1% that you should truly be afraid of. Tonight, we're diving into 4 bone-chilling true stories of people who ignored their gut feelings, only to find themselves face to face with pure malice. From predators hiding in plain sight to shadows that shouldn't exist. These accounts will make you realize that sometimes you're never as alone as you think. Lock your doors, dim the lights, and let's begin. I've always been a fan of solitude. There's something about the backcountry that calls to you, the silence, the isolation. But that weekend by the lake, the silence felt heavy. I'm not a professional hiker, just someone who enjoys a quiet campsite a mile or 2 from civilization. On my 3rd morning, I trekked back to my truck to grab a fishing rod and some extra supplies. When I returned, the atmosphere had shifted. A second tent had appeared. It was situated further down the shoreline, near a cluster of weeping willows. It was unnerving because the trail I used was the only way in, and I hadn't passed a single soul. For 3 hours, I sat with my fishing rod, my eyes darting back and forth between the water and that silent green tent. Not a flap moved, not a shadow stirred inside. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long, jagged shadows across the water, I lit my campfire. The crackle of the wood was the only sound in the world, until I saw it. A dark figure, standing perfectly still just beyond the reach of my fire's glow. I froze. I assumed it was just the other camper, perhaps gathering wood. But then, 3 more figures emerged from the tree line. 4 men, moving in a synchronized, haunting rhythm. They didn't have flashlights. They didn't have gear. They just had these cold, dead stares. They walked right into my camp. 2 of them began tossing my belongings out of my tent with a mechanical coldness, while the other 2 grabbed my arms. Their grip was like iron. They started dragging me away from the fire, deeper into the dark forest. I pleaded, I offered them money, but they didn't even blink. Their eyes were empty, like glass beads. When I saw one of them reach into a dark coat pocket, my survival instinct finally overrode my terror. I twisted violently, broke free, and ran through the thorns and darkness until my lungs felt like they were bleeding. I reached my truck, locked the doors, and drove until I saw city lights. My gear was gone, but the thought of what they were dragging me towards still keeps me awake at night. In my small rural town, the river was our playground and our greatest fear. Usually, it was a lazy, shallow stream, but during typhoon season, it transformed into a raging, chocolate-colored monster that could swallow a household. One night, a massive storm hit. The wind was howling like a wounded animal, and the rain was hammering against my window so hard I couldn't sleep. Around 4 a.m., the downpour eased into a thick, eerie mist. Something, I still don't know what, compelled me to go outside. I put on my heavy coat and boots, grabbed a flashlight, and walked toward the riverbank. The sound was deafening, a constant, low roar of water and debris. I stood there, mesmerized by the power of nature, when I heard a sound that didn't belong. A wet, frantic gurgling. I swept my flashlight across the churning mud. Suddenly, a voice sliced through the roar of the water. Hey, it was a man's voice, desperate and sharp. I spun around, thinking someone was standing right behind me in the woods. Nothing, just dripping trees. Then it came again, louder, coming from the water itself. Hey, you, help! I froze. Panic, cold and sharp, paralyzed my legs. I was a kid alone in the dark, and the voice sounded wrong. It sounded like it was coming from under the water. Instead of reaching out, instead of calling for my father, I turned and ran back to the house, diving under my covers until the sun rose. 2 days later, a search party found a body caught in the dam miles downstream. He had been swept away that night. Every time it rains now, I hear that voice. Hey, you. And I'm forced to live with the knowledge that I was the last person who could have saved him, and I chose to run. Working the night shift at a hotel is a lesson in patience and paranoia. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Mostly, it's just me, the hum of the vending machines, and the rain. One particular night, the rain was relentless. Around 1 a.m., the phone rang. A man's voice, distorted by heavy static and a loud background noise, asked if we had any rooms. I told him we did, but he didn't hang up. He just went silent. As I waited for him to speak, I glanced at the large glass windows of the lobby. There, in the middle of the deluge, stood a man. He was holding a glowing phone to his ear, staring directly at my face from the darkness outside. He didn't move. He just watched me. Then, he hung up, the light on his phone died, and he walked through the sliding doors. He was drenched, his clothes clinging to his skeletal frame, his eyes sunken and wide with a terrifying level of sleep deprivation. He didn't say hello. He just demanded a room. When I swiped his card and it was declined, he didn't argue. He didn't even blink. He just stared at me for 10 long, agonizing seconds. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the guest hallways. I knew this wasn't a normal guest. I hit the silent alarm and followed him at a distance. I found him in the third-floor hallway, standing in front of room 312. He began to pound on the door, heavy, violent blows that echoed through the corridor. Then he pulled a long hunting knife from his waistband and began stabbing at the door frame. "Open the door," he screamed, his voice breaking into a jagged howl. When he saw me, his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. I ran for the exit as the sirens grew closer. The police tackled him in the lobby. It turned out the woman in room 312 was his ex-wife. He had been stalking her for a decade across 3 states. He hadn't come for a room. He had come for her. This is a memory that has haunted my family for years. My cousin Dylan was 7 years old, a quiet kid who loved M&MS and playing on the school slides. His parents worked late, so he was always the last one at the after-school program. One afternoon, a woman walked up to the playground. She looked normal, early 30s, long dark hair, casual clothes. She walked straight to the teacher and pointed at Dylan. "I'm Heather," she said with a warm smile. "I work with Dylan's sister, Alyssa. She's stuck at work and asked me to pick him up." The teacher, without checking his ID or calling the parents, let Dylan go. The woman took his hand, her grip uncomfortably tight, and led him to a rusted sedan. She gave him a bag of M&MS to keep him quiet. At first, Dylan wasn't scared, but then she drove past his street. "Ma'am, you missed my house," he whispered. The woman's smile vanished. Her face became a cold, hard stone. "Shut up," she snapped. The warmth in her voice was replaced by a chilling, metallic edge. Dylan realized something was terribly wrong when he asked, "Are you friends with Alyssa?" She looked at him through the rearview mirror, her eyes filled with a terrifying emptiness. "Who the hell is Alyssa?" she muttered. Dylan started to cry. She pulled over, reached into the glove box, and pulled out a roll of heavy-duty duct tape. He thought it was over, but then a miracle. A patrol car, noticing the illegally parked car, pulled up behind them. The woman panicked. She slammed the car into gear and took off, leading the police on a 70 miles per hour chase through residential streets. She was eventually cornered at a blockade. They found out later she was part of a professional kidnapping ring. The most disturbing part? The teacher who gave Dylan away had been paid. He had sold Dylan's schedule and name to those people. There are monsters in this world, and sometimes they're the people we are told to trust the most.